He was the most feared mafia boss in Italy. She was just a waitress with a smile that melted his darkness. But one night of love turned into a lifetime of betrayal. 7 years later, when their son is kidnapped, he returns, not for power, but for redemption. But can love survive when the past still has a gun pointed at them? Before we dive into today's thrilling story, tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? I love seeing how far our stories travel across the world. Rome was painted in gold that night, streetlights glowing softly over cobblestone roads, laughter echoing from passing couples, and violins whispering through the open doors of La Velura, the most luxurious restaurant in the city. Inside, crystal chandeliers cast a warm shimmer over velvet seats and wine glasses that clinked like delicate promises. It was a place where the rich came to taste power, and where danger sometimes wore an elegant smile. At the corner table, under a cloud of cigar smoke, Vincenzo Moretti sat in silence. The young mafia boss, barely 30, was dressed in a black leather jacket that gleamed under the dim light. Tattoos curled up the side of his neck, disappearing beneath a thick gold chain that caught every spark from the chandelier. His blue eyes were sharp, cold, the kind of eyes that had seen blood and betrayal more than affection. The air around him carried weight. Men feared to speak too loudly when he was near. But tonight something shifted. Across the room, balancing a tray with grace, walked Isabella Hart, the newest waitress at La Velura. She was 23, young, beautiful, with a soft cascade of chestnut hair and ocean blue eyes that could calm even the most chaotic soul. She moved like music, every step quiet, every gesture kind. When she smiled, it wasn't for tips or attention. It was genuine, effortless, the kind of smile that could make even the devil hesitate. Vincenzo's gaze followed her without permission. He'd seen women, hundreds perhaps, all desperate for his attention, for his money, for the thrill of being near danger. But this girl, she didn't even glance his way, and that, somehow, intrigued him more than anything. "Boss," murmured Marco, his right-hand man, leaning close. The meeting... Vincenzo lifted a finger, silencing him. "Later," he said quietly, his eyes never leaving the girl. Isabella approached his table, unaware of the storm she was walking into. She set down a glass of red wine, her voice calm and polite. "Good evening, sir. Would you like to see the dessert menu?" Her tone was light, respectful. She didn't stutter or tremble like others did. Vincenzo tilted his head slightly, his gaze lowering to her hands. Delicate, steady. "Do I look like a man who eats dessert?" he asked, his voice deep, smooth, carrying that quiet authority that made everyone listen. She smiled softly, a playful curve at the corner of her lips. "Everyone deserves something sweet after a long day," she replied. For a moment, he forgot to breathe. Her words weren't bold, but they were real, and no one had spoken to him like that in years. Marco raised a brow, glancing at the other men. They looked at each other, half expecting their boss to lash out. But instead, Vincenzo chuckled under his breath, a low, rare sound that startled even himself. "What's your name?" he asked finally. "Isabella," she said, straightening up. "Isabella Hart." He repeated it under his breath, as if tasting the name like fine wine. "Beautiful name." She nodded politely, not flattered, just professional. "Thank you, sir." Then she walked away, leaving behind a silence that lingered like perfume. For the rest of the evening, Vincenzo found himself distracted. The business deal before him blurred into meaningless noise. Every time Isabella passed by, his attention drifted. Her presence softened the edge of his world, and that unsettled him more than any rival could. Later that night, when the restaurant began to empty, Vincenzo rose from his chair. He slipped a few €100 notes beneath his untouched plate and motioned Marco to wait outside. As he reached the counter, Isabella was wiping down tables, humming softly under her breath. "You have a beautiful voice," he said quietly. She froze, surprised to see him still there. "Thank you," she said again, polite but cautious. "You shouldn't be out this late alone, sir. The streets around here aren't safe." He smirked. "They're safe when I'm around." There was something in the way he said it, confidence mixed with a hint of danger, that made her heart skip a beat. She forced a small laugh. "I'm sure they are." He leaned in slightly, close enough for her to smell his cologne, cedarwood and smoke. "I'll be seeing you again, Isabella Hart." Her eyes lifted to meet his, and for the first time she saw something flicker there. Not arrogance, not cruelty, but something else, something unspoken. She wanted to ask who he really was, why everyone in the restaurant seemed afraid of him, but before she could, he slipped a card onto the table. Blank, except for a phone number. Then he left. Isabella stood there for a moment, staring at the door as it closed behind him. A strange chill ran down her spine, the kind of feeling you get when destiny brushes past you. Outside, the night air carried the sound of engines and distant sirens. Vincenzo slid into the back seat of his black Maserati, his reflection caught in the tinted window. For the first time in years, his mind wasn't on deals or blood feuds. It was on a waitress with a fearless smile. Meanwhile, Isabella walked home through the quiet streets of Rome. Her heels clicked softly against the stone, the city lights dancing in puddles from an earlier rain. She held her coat tighter, her mind spinning with questions she didn't understand. Who was he really? Why did his eyes feel like they saw through her? Halfway down Via Cavour, she stopped. The air felt heavy. Something about the street seemed wrong. Behind her, headlights flickered. A sleek black car rolled slowly down the lane, quiet, deliberate. She turned slightly, her pulse quickening. The window tinted black. No sound, no words, just silence. Her breath caught. She began walking faster, trying to shake off the unease. But the car moved too, not fast, not slow, just following. She stopped again, heart pounding. The car stopped too. Her lips parted, and a small gasp escaped. She could feel someone watching her, eyes cold, intense, familiar. As Isabella hurried across the street, the car's window lowered just an inch, enough for her to glimpse the reflection of piercing blue eyes in the darkness. Vincenzo Moretti was inside, and this was only the beginning. The night after that strange encounter, Isabella couldn't sleep. The image of those piercing blue eyes behind the tinted glass haunted her dreams. She told herself she was imagining things, that it couldn't possibly be him, but something inside whispered that it was. The next morning, she returned to La Viura early, trying to lose herself in routine. The smell of coffee, the clinking of plates, the soft hum of a violinist tuning his strings. It all felt normal. But the calm didn't last. A man in a tailored black suit walked in holding an envelope. He asked for Isabella by name. The manager frowned but waved her over. She wiped her hands on her apron and took the envelope, confused. Inside, a single card. Dinner. 8 p.m. My villa. Business. No signature. But the handwriting. Bold, elegant. She knew it. Her heart raced. She should have thrown it away. She should have ignored it. But curiosity, or maybe something stronger, wouldn't let her. By 7:45, she found herself standing before a tall iron gate, the kind that hid secrets behind beauty. Beyond it, a stone driveway curved up to a villa bathed in golden light. 2 guards nodded silently and opened the gate. She stepped out of the cab, the night breeze brushing against her neck. Her heels clicked against the marble steps as she approached the front door. Before she could knock, it opened. Vincenzo stood there. Black shirt, sleeves rolled up, tattoos glinting faintly under the lights. He looked less like a monster tonight, and more like a man trying to remember how to live. "You came," he said softly. "I wasn't sure I should," she replied. His lips curved faintly. "Neither was I." He led her inside. The villa was breathtaking. Chandeliers swaying gently, long velvet curtains framing the windows, the faint scent of expensive cigars lingering in the air. but there was also silence. Heavy, almost sacred. "Is this your business meeting?" she asked, trying to sound casual. He turned to her, his gaze locking with hers. "In a way." She crossed her arms. "I'm a waitress, not a broker." "I don't need a broker," he murmured, stepping closer. "I needed to see you again." Her breath hitched. "Why?" He looked at her like a man searching for truth. "Because for the first time in years, I met someone who wasn't afraid of me." For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence between them felt alive, pulsing with something neither of them understood. Dinner was served by one of his men. Candlelight flickering between them, shadows dancing on the walls. She asked questions he rarely answered. He told stories he'd never shared. There was laughter, rare and quiet, that slipped from his guarded lips. At one point, she looked up and said, "You don't seem like the man people whisper about." His jaw tightened. "Maybe that's because you're the first to look past the whispers." Later, as the night deepened, he offered her a glass of wine. Their fingers brushed. It was a spark, small but undeniable. She tried to pull back, but he caught her wrist gently. "You're trembling," he said. "I shouldn't be here," she whispered. "Then why are you?" She met his eyes. "Because I wanted to know who you really are." He stepped closer until there was only breath between them. "And what do you see?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Someone pretending not to feel." The words hit him harder than bullets. He leaned in, brushing a strand of hair from her face. His touch was rough but careful. The touch of a man used to breaking things but afraid to break her. When his lips finally met hers, it wasn't hunger. It was surrender. Fire and silk, pain and comfort, all tangled into one stolen moment. Hours melted into whispers. The walls of the villa held secrets that only the moon could witness. Their laughter turned to sighs, and somewhere between the shadows, his heart, the one he thought long dead, began to beat again. But morning came too soon. Isabella woke to sunlight spilling across the sheets, her hair tangled in warmth and confusion. Vincenzo was already up, standing by the window, shirtless, tattoos painting stories across his skin. He looked lost in thought, like a man haunted by ghosts only he could see. She wrapped the blanket around herself and whispered, "Are you always this quiet in the morning?" He turned slightly, a faint smile on his lips. "Only when I'm thinking about mistakes I don't want to make again." She looked down. Was last night a mistake? His silence lingered too long. "No," he said finally, "but it might become one." Her heart sank. Before she could ask what he meant, Marco entered without knocking. "Boss," he said quickly, glancing at Isabella and then away. "We need to talk." Vincenzo's expression hardened. The softness vanished, replaced by the coldness of the man the world feared. "Not now," he said firmly. Marco hesitated. "It's important. There's talk. Someone's leaking information about our shipments, about the clubs." Vincenzo's eyes narrowed. "Find out who, quietly." Marco nodded and left, but not before his gaze flicked toward Isabella, lingering a second too long. She felt it, that shift in the air, the warmth of the night replaced by an invisible tension. She stood, pulling on her dress, trying to shake off the unease. "Your world is dangerous," she said softly. "It's a world that doesn't forgive mistakes," he replied, his tone heavy. She turned to him, eyes searching his face. "And what about the people caught in it?" He looked at her with something close to regret. "They get burned." Days passed like smoke. Isabella returned to work, but something inside her had changed. The nights at the villa replayed in her mind, the tenderness in his touch, the silence in his eyes. Yet behind that tenderness she sensed something dark stirring. Rumors spread like wildfire through the restaurant. Strange men at the bar asking too many questions. Unmarked cars parked too long outside. And sometimes, late at night, she swore she saw Vincenzo's car waiting across the street, watching, guarding, or maybe warning. Then one evening, as rain poured over Rome, Isabella found herself back at the villa. He had called her, said he needed to see her. She arrived soaked, trembling, but he barely looked up from his desk. Papers scattered, maps spread open. His men stood around, whispering. "You called me," she said softly. He nodded. "Stay close. Things are getting complicated." Her heart pounded. "Because of the leak?" His eyes lifted sharply. "Who told you about that?" "I overheard," she said quickly. "Marco mentioned it." He stared at her for a long moment, then sighed. "Don't trust anyone, Isabella, not even the ones who smile at you." That night, after everyone left, she sat by the fireplace alone, tracing her fingers along the edge of a wine glass. She thought about how his world was built on secrets, how love in such a place could only lead to pain. The wind howled outside. Shadows moved along the walls. Somewhere down the hall, muffled voices drifted through the door. Marco's voice, low and cautious. "She's too close to him," someone whispered. "She's new," another voice replied. "She asks questions. Too many." Then came the words that froze her blood. "Vincenzo thinks the leak's inside his circle. What if it's her?" The glass slipped from her hand, shattering against the marble floor. Isabella pressed herself against the wall, heart racing. Through the crack in the door, she heard Marco's final words, cold and certain. "Tell the boss. Isabella Hart might be the one." The night hung heavy over Rome, draped in rain and restless whispers. The city lights shimmered like broken glass reflected in puddles, and inside La Velura, chandeliers once again cast their golden glow. But tonight the air was colder, sharper. Something dark pulsed beneath the elegance. Isabella stood at the edge of the ballroom, her white gown flowing softly around her. She'd been invited by Vincenzo himself, or so she thought. His message had been simple. "Be there. We need to talk." But as she scanned the glittering crowd, the politicians, the mob lieutenants, the women in diamonds, she felt an ache in her chest. Something was wrong. He hadn't looked at her once since she arrived. Vincenzo sat at the far end of the hall, surrounded by his men, a glass of whiskey in hand. His expression was unreadable, a marble mask carved by suspicion. Marco leaned close to him, whispering something. Vincenzo's jaw tightened. Her heartbeat quickened. She could feel it, the distance, the tension. Every time she tried to move closer, someone stepped in her way. Finally, as the orchestra began to play, she gathered her courage and crossed the room. The sound of her heels echoed like soft thunder against marble. The crowd parted slightly, curious. When she reached him, he didn't rise. He just looked up slowly, his blue eyes colder than she'd ever seen them. "Vincenzo," she said quietly, "you asked me to come. What's happening?" He set his glass down, the clink echoing louder than the music. "What's happening?" His voice was low, sharp as broken ice. "You tell me, Isabella." Her breath caught. "I don't understand." "Don't you?" He stood then, towering over her, the room falling silent around them. "You think I wouldn't find out? The police knew details, things only someone close to me could know." She shook her head, stepping back. "That's not true. I would never—" "Don't lie to me." His voice cracked through the hall like a whip. Guests froze mid-conversation, pretending not to watch but failing miserably. The orchestra stopped playing. The silence that followed was suffocating. Her eyes filled with tears. "Vincenzo, please, you know me, you—" "I thought I did," he interrupted, his tone cutting, raw with anger and betrayal. "But every time I look at you now, I see the faces of men in uniforms waiting to bury me." "I didn't do anything," she cried. "I love—" "Love?" He spat the word like poison. "You think love excuses betrayal?" His words hit her harder than any slap could. Her hands trembled, her heart twisting in her chest. She wanted to scream, to grab him and make him see the truth. But his eyes were already somewhere far away. "Vincenzo," she whispered, voice breaking. "Please, look at me. You know I'd never hurt you." For a moment the rage in his eyes faltered, just a flicker of doubt, of something human. But Marco's hand landed on his shoulder, and the moment shattered. "Boss," Marco said softly, "it's done. The files, the names, they all trace back to her." She turned to Marco in disbelief. "That's a lie!" But Vincenzo wasn't listening anymore. He stared at her with the kind of cold finality that ends wars and breaks hearts. He stepped close enough for her to feel his breath, the scent of whiskey and smoke filling the air between them. The room was still, the crowd holding its collective breath. And then he whispered, just loud enough for her to hear, "Don't look at him again." Her lips parted, confusion flooding her face. "What?" He leaned closer, his voice steady and cruel. "The man you looked at when you thought I wasn't watching. The man who smiled back. Don't look at him again, Isabella." Her tears fell freely now, streaking her cheeks like fragile rain. "There was no one else," she pleaded. "Vincenzo, you're making a mistake." He didn't answer. He turned, signaled his men, and walked away, his black coat cutting through the room like a blade through silk. The sound of his footsteps was final. Isabella stood frozen in the center of the ballroom, her heart bleeding in silence. The whispers began immediately, cruel, hushed, venomous. The Mafia Boss's girl, the traitor. Someone laughed softly. Another took a picture. The humiliation burned hotter than fire. When she finally moved, it was to run. Out of the hall, out into the rain, out of the world she thought she belonged to. The streets were empty, the city cruel. She didn't care where she was going, she just needed to breathe. By the time she reached her small apartment, her dress was soaked, clinging to her skin. She collapsed by the door, her sobs echoing through the quiet room. Hours passed before she calmed enough to stand. Her reflection in the mirror frightened her. Red eyes, trembling lips, mascara smeared like bruises. She pressed her hand to her stomach, the ache inside sharper than ever. Days blurred together after that. She quit La Valura, unable to face the stares. She ignored the calls from unknown numbers, threw away the necklace he'd given her. Every piece of him hurt to touch. One morning, when she finally gathered the strength to see a doctor for the constant nausea and dizziness, she received news that shattered her all over again. "Congratulations," the doctor said gently. "You're going to be a mother." The room spun. She couldn't speak. Her hands went cold. Vincenzo's face flashed in her mind. The anger, the disgust, the last words he'd spoken. "Don't look at him again." She stumbled out of the clinic, clutching the test in shaking hands, alone, pregnant, heartbroken. That night, she sat by her window, the rain tapping softly against the glass. The city lights blurred through her tears. She whispered to herself, "You'll never know. You'll never even know." The silence in the room was unbearable until her phone buzzed on the table. Unknown number. She hesitated, wiped her eyes, and answered. Nothing, just breathing. "Hello?" she said softly. Still silence, then a click. A message appeared a second later. Her heart froze as she read it. "You think he betrayed you, but he's the one being betrayed." Rain fell over London like silver tears that refused to stop. Isabella stood by her small apartment window, staring at the dim city lights that blurred behind the mist. In her arms, she held a newborn, tiny, fragile, yet holding eyes that burned with the same blue fire as the man she once loved. Adrian. His name was whispered like a promise she would never break. He was her strength when the world tried to crush her. The pain of betrayal still haunted her nights, but this child gave her a reason to live, to fight, to rise. Her days began before dawn and ended long after midnight. With no family, no wealth, and no one to lean on, she worked in a small bakery at first, washing dishes, scrubbing floors, sleeping only when her body collapsed from exhaustion. But each time she looked at Adrian's face, something inside her refused to surrender. She carried him in a sling on her back while mixing dough, took catering orders on the phone while feeding him, and learned business through hunger and mistakes. Every insult from customers, every sleepless night, she turned into fuel for her ambition. Time inched forward like a wounded soldier. London's winter bit into her bones, but her resolve only hardened. She borrowed a few pounds to start her own catering service, a humble dream that began in her tiny kitchen. The aroma of her handmade Italian dishes soon caught the attention of a local event planner. One small wedding job became 5. 5 became 50. People began to talk about the mysterious young woman with grace in her hands and sorrow in her eyes. Isabella's catering was born, the empire that pain built. Adrian grew beside her success. He had the same intense gaze, the same mischievous smile that once melted her heart. Every time she looked at him, she saw Vincenzo, and it hurt. She told herself she hated that man. But hate often hides what love refuses to admit. She'd watch her son sleep and whisper, "You'll never know his world, my love. You'll never walk his path." But the universe never forgets unfinished stories. As Isabella's company grew, from small events to corporate galas, the ghosts of her past followed silently. Reporters started calling her the Queen of Taste, and luxury magazines wanted her story. She smiled for cameras, dressed in elegant suits, but deep inside, her heart carried scars the world couldn't see. When she looked in the mirror, she saw not success, but survival. Her penthouse in London glimmered with sophistication, yet every corner reminded her of where she came from. The scent of red wine still reminded her of Rome, of that fateful night when the man she loved walked away. There were times she thought she saw him, in a passing car, in a reflection on the glass, but it was always her memory playing cruel tricks. Vincenzo Moretti was gone, and she had made peace with that. Or at least she tried. Adrian, now 5, filled her mornings with laughter and her evenings with chaos. He had a curious mind, loved drawing cars, and often asked questions about his father. Each time, Isabella froze for a moment, forcing a smile. "He was someone brave," she would say softly, her voice trembling just enough to betray her pain. On his 5th birthday, she threw him a small party, balloons, cake, and a few of his friends from kindergarten. The house echoed with giggles and the sound of tiny feet running on marble floors. For a brief moment, Isabella allowed herself to breathe. She watched her son blow the candles, the flame lighting up his innocent eyes, and she felt whole. As the evening sun dipped behind the skyline, the guests left one by one. Isabella cleaned up the living room, humming softly. Adrian's laughter came from the hallway, pure, untainted joy. Then the phone rang. She didn't recognize the number. Her heart thumped softly, a strange unease curling in her stomach. She answered, her tone polite yet cautious. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was low, male, unfamiliar. "Is this Isabella Hart?" "Yes, who is this?" she asked, frowning slightly. There was silence for a moment, and then words that froze her blood. "We have your son." The glass in her hand slipped, shattering on the floor. What are you saying?" Her voice broke. "Bring $2 million if you ever want to see him again." The voice continued coldly. "You have 48 hours. Her breath caught in her throat. "No, please, what do you want? He's just a child." But the line had already gone dead. Her heart raced wildly. She stumbled toward Adrian's room, empty. The toys were scattered. The curtain swayed slightly from the open window. A single blue balloon drifted lazily to the ceiling, mocking her. Her scream echoed through the house, sharp and desperate, as she collapsed to her knees, clutching the small toy car her son had just been holding moments ago. Her world, the empire she built through blood and pain, shattered in an instant. And somewhere in the dark corners of London, an old ghost, one with blue eyes and a heart still chained to her memory, was about to hear the cry of the woman he once left behind. As Isabella's trembling hands held the silent phone, a new message appeared on the screen. From an unknown number, it read, "He knows. Vincenzo is coming." The night pressed heavy against the glass walls of Isabella's mansion. Rain tapped the windows like anxious fingers as she sat in her office, staring blankly at the message still glowing on her phone. He knows. Vincenzo is coming. Her mind raced through chaos. Her son's laughter, his empty room, the cruel voice that demanded ransom. Every second felt like an eternity carved from fear. Yet beneath the trembling, a storm of determination began to rise. She would not break. She had clawed her way through hell once. She could do it again. She dialed number after number, calling her most trusted business partners, security teams, even old contacts from the catering world who now owed her favors. Her voice was sharp, cold, and desperate all at once. "Find my son," she ordered. "I don't care what it costs. Every street, every camera. I want them watched." Her assistant, Clara, tried to steady her. But Isabella's eyes were ablaze. "He's my life, Clara. I'll burn the world if I have to." Meanwhile, across the sea, in a secluded estate near Lake Como, Vincenzo Moretti sat alone in his study. Surrounded by silence and ghosts, the empire he had built over 7 years had turned darker, more ruthless, and his name was now whispered like a curse in every corner of Italy. Yet for all his power, something inside him had withered. He hadn't touched another woman since Isabella. He'd buried his longing beneath violence, buried his guilt under business. But some wounds don't stay buried forever. That night, his trusted right-hand man, Enzo, stood before him with trembling hands. "Boss, there's something you need to know." Vincenzo's cold blue eyes lifted from the whiskey glass. "Speak." "It wasn't Isabella," Enzo stammered. "The traitor. It was Marco. He framed her. He sold the police information to save himself." For a moment, the air froze. Vincenzo's fingers clenched around the glass until it cracked, amber liquid spilling over his tattoos. "What did you just say?" His voice was a whisper, dangerous and deadly. Enzo swallowed hard. "I swear, boss, we found proof. The messages, the payments, all from Marco. She was innocent." The sound that escaped Vincenzo was part growl, part exhale. The sound of a man realizing he had destroyed the only pure thing in his life. His mind flashed back to that night in the restaurant. Her tears, her trembling voice, his cruel words. "Don't look at him again." He'd believed lies over love, and now she was gone. He rose slowly, walking to the window as the moonlight sliced across his face. His reflection looked like a stranger, a killer haunted by his own choices. "Where is Marco now?" "Dead," Enzo replied quietly. "He was killed last month. Someone wanted him silenced." Vincenzo's jaw tightened. "Of course, the same people who betrayed me back then." He turned, his expression unreadable. "And Isabella?" "She's in London," Enzo said. She's a billionaire now. Built an empire out of nothing, and—" He hesitated. "She has a son, a boy, 5 years old." The words sliced through Vincenzo's chest. A boy, 5 years. His breath caught as realization hit him like thunder. His son. He didn't move for several seconds. Then his voice came out rough, like gravel. "What's his name?" "Adrian," Enzo whispered. Vincenzo sank into his chair, his hands shaking for the first time in years. He remembered her smile, her warmth, the nights they shared under the Roman sky. And now, somewhere in London, his blood, his son, was in danger. He shot to his feet. "Get the jet ready," he ordered. "Now!" Enzo blinked. "Boss, you can't just—" Vincenzo's glare cut him off. "I said now!" Within the hour, the sound of roaring engines filled the night sky as his private jet sliced through the storm, heading toward London. Back in the city, Isabella stood on the balcony, wind tangling her hair as she stared into the endless dark. Her thoughts were a battlefield: fear, guilt, determination, rage. She'd called the police, but they were too slow, too tangled in bureaucracy. The kidnappers had given her 48 hours. It had already been 12. She poured herself a glass of wine, though her hands trembled too much to drink it. She walked through Adrian's room again, clutching his tiny blanket to her chest. The scent of him made her eyes sting. "Hold on, my baby," she whispered. "Mommy's coming for you." Her phone buzzed again, an unknown number. She hesitated, heart pounding. When she answered, a distorted voice spoke. "You have 24 hours left, Miss Hart. Don't call the police. Don't be clever." Her throat tightened. "Please, I'll pay. Just let me hear him." A child's frightened sob echoed faintly through the line. "Mommy! Adrian!" she screamed, but the call ended before she could speak again. Her knees gave way, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. She pressed her forehead to the cold floor, shaking. Then, like a switch, something inside her shifted. Her grief turned into fire. "You took my child," she whispered. "Now I'm coming for you." She stood up, wiped her tears, and called a private investigator she once worked with during a corporate blackmail case. "It's Isabella Hart," she said. "My son's been taken. I want every security feed, every contact, every whisper on the street. You find them." Across the world, Vincenzo's jet landed on the runway of a private London airfield. He stepped out, black leather jacket, tattoos glinting under the floodlights, his expression carved from stone. The same ruthless aura, but his heart was chaos. Guilt, fear, love. Enzo followed him. "Boss, what's the plan?" Vincenzo didn't answer immediately. He looked toward the glowing skyline in the distance. "My blood is in danger," he said finally, "and I'm not losing him. Or her. Again." Hours later, Isabella's mansion stood silent, the storm still whispering through the night. She sat by the window, her eyes raw from crying, when the distant sound of an engine shattered the quiet. Her breath hitched. The noise grew louder, the deep, menacing roar of a car she somehow recognized in her bones. She stood up slowly, moving to the glass. Headlights cut through the rain. A sleek black Lamborghini screeched to a stop outside her gates. For a heartbeat, she couldn't move. Her pulse thundered. And then she saw him. Vincenzo Moretti, the man who had broken her, the man she swore she'd never see again. Stepping out of the car, rain glistening off his leather jacket, his blue eyes locked on her window like a ghost returned from hell. The gates creaked open. Isabella's trembling hand gripped the curtain as he began walking toward her door. Slow, purposeful, unstoppable. And all she could whisper, in disbelief and fear, was, "Vincenzo?" He stood on her doorstep, rain beating on the leather of his jacket, breath clouding in the cold air. Her hand trembled on the knob. The sound of her heartbeat loud in her ears. For a second she simply stared, unable to reconcile the man at her threshold with the memory that haunted her dreams. He looked older, the line at his temple deeper, the edges of his face sharper, as if the years had carved him into something more dangerous. But the blue of his eyes was the same, fierce, impossible, and unbearably familiar. He didn't smile. He didn't try to charm her. He only stood there, drenched and steady, as if the storm outside were nothing compared to whatever storm had brought him here. Isabella. His voice was low, steadier than she felt. She swallowed. The name on his lips felt like an accusation and an apology at once. "You shouldn't be here," she managed, stepping back inside while keeping the door partly closed between them. "I had to come," he said simply. "There was no one else I could trust to move this fast." She heard the raw edges beneath those words. Not the arrogance she'd once known, but something like desperation. "Move what?" she asked, though she already knew. She could feel the pull of blood in the air, the magnetic current that had always existed between them. "Adrian," he said. The name left his mouth as if it belonged to him now as much as to her. Her breath hitched. The room felt suddenly too small for the weight of the moment. How did you— She cut herself off, angry at the question, at him, at herself for needing him. I found out the truth, he said. Enzo sent word. Marco framed you. Her hands curled into fists. That was 7 years ago. And I was a fool, he answered. A monster. His eyes burned. I'm here because of that monster. Anger flared bright and hot in her chest. You broke me. He looked away, posture folding under a memory that wasn't spoken. I thought I was protecting myself. I thought you were a threat. I chose to believe a lie. You chose to believe a lie in front of everyone, she said, voice sharp. You humiliated me. You left me. He didn't argue. He let his guilt sit between them like a third person in the room. Why now? She demanded. Why come after all these years? He took a step closer, but he stayed on the other side of the threshold. Because my blood was taken. The words landed like a stone in her gut. She felt the world tilt. She couldn't finish. My son, he said. He's my son. There was no pride in his voice, only an aching animal fear. She wanted to recoil, to slam the door, to pretend he was still the man who had walked away. Instead, she felt the old, stubborn ember of something she'd never been able to fully erase. You think showing up in a leather jacket will fix anything? She asked, arms crossed, the guardrails of her life reasserting themselves. I don't expect forgiveness, he said honestly. I expect to help bring him home. There was a long silence, the kind where plans and memories and decisions all wait for a breath to be taken. You have no right, she whispered. You have no right to come here and— Maybe I don't, he cut in. But right now, both of us want the same thing. She searched his face, looking for trickery, for manipulation. Instead, she found raw, helpless love. You still love him, she said finally, voice barely audible. His lips twitched, not a smile, but a memory. I love him, he admitted. And I love you, whether I deserve it or not. Rage flared again, sudden and fierce. Don't say that to me. He flinched as though struck. I know. She thought of every sleepless night he had cost her, every insult, every humiliation. She thought of Adrian's tiny fingers, of his laugh, of the future she had built on the bones of that heartbreak. You think I'll let you waltz in and take command? She demanded, voice hard as flint. He didn't back down. I would never take command of your life. Then what do you want? She asked. Your empire? My company? My son? The last word trembled between them. My son, he repeated. He's both of ours, whether we like it or not. For a moment, the old tenderness shifted the room like wind through curtains. She listened to the memory of his hands, the taste of his apologies left unsaid for years. Fine, she said finally, each word deliberate. But on my terms. He nodded. On your terms. Relief flickered across his features, then hardened into focus. Tell me what you know. She took a breath and laid out what little she had. The ransom call, the 48-hour ultimatum, the shadowy voice, the single trace of a number that led nowhere. He listened like a man cataloging the world for weak points. When she finished, he sucked in a breath and moved like a machine switching to life. We need every camera, every witness, every scrap of phone data, he said. We need those who owe you favors and those who fear me. We need to find who took him now. Or, she asked, or we lose him, he answered plainly. There isn't an or I want. She wanted to hate him for the way his certainty made her feel small. But the truth was, his leadership could get things done in ways hers couldn't. She would never admit it aloud. We'll do it your way, she said, thinking of Adrian's face, the small, trusting boy who still believed in bedtime stories and gentle hands. He studied her like a man trying to memorize a map. I need access to everything. Security logs, contact lists, your private investigators' leads. You're asking me to hand you the keys to my life, she said. I'm asking you to let me use what you already have, he corrected. I'll work with your people. She hesitated. Trust was a currency she'd learned to spend very carefully. But when mother love and desperation sit across from each other, decisions become simpler. Okay, she said, heart a drum in her chest. But I'm in charge of negotiations. Deal. He extended his hand, the old gesture of business and war. She took it, feeling the calluses and the heat of his skin. The contact made something inside them both recalibrate. We have to move fast, Vincenzo said. These men don't play fair. She nodded, thinking of the ransom demand, the voice on the line, the child's sob. Movement now had the urgency of a heartbeat. They worked through the night like conspirators. Her assistant, Clara, arrived with lists and contacts. Her private investigator, Thomas, sent over surveillance feeds. Vincenzo placed calls that made people answer in a different tone, the tone of fear or respect or both. As dawn bled pale into the London sky, a map was spread across her dining table, pins and photos and angles of escape. The plan was messy, imperfect, alive. Do they know you? She asked quietly, watching him trace a route with a finger. Most of them know me, he said. Some fear me, some follow me. None will stand against my determination right now. You can't go full force, she warned. If you bring the wars of your world to my doorstep, Adrian will pay. He looked up sharply. I won't let that happen. Her eyes searched his, fierce and unforgiving. I don't want your protection if it looks like a declaration of war. It won't, he promised. We'll be shadows. They moved like thieves through their plans, trading intel and memories, pairing his muscle with her resources. He introduced her to silent tactics, old loyalties, quiet men with quiet guns. She taught him about boardroom tactics, legal loopholes, subtle influence. Between them, the old distance closed, not into softness, but into a practical, brutal intimacy. They found themselves laughing once, brittle and sudden, at the absurdity of teaching a mafia boss how to sign a contract. It felt like a lifetime and a heartbeat rolled together. You still stutter when you lie, she said, mocking him gently. He offered a crooked smile. You notice everything. The hours fell away. They worked until their eyes burned and their hands cramped, until the first real lead came in. A grainy footage of a delivery van 3 neighborhoods over, screenshotted at 2 a.m. The van had been driving on a route that matched a safe house pattern. Could be a break, Thomas said, voice thin with hope. It's a start, Vincenzo said. We move on this now. They divided tasks with an efficiency born of necessity. Isabella coordinated alarms and ransom protocol simulations. Vincenzo pulled strings to have certain streets cleared, certain cameras handed over. Clara made calls that opened doors. In the middle of it all, when fatigue threatened to drown them, Vincenzo brought coffee and sandwiches and sat in silence, watching her. You look tired, he said once, concern cutting through the night's adrenaline. She laughed, but it was raw. I look tired because I am tired. You don't have to do this alone, he said, soft as a confession. I am doing it alone, she corrected, until now. He closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, and something like regret flickered across his face. I should have been here. You weren't, she said. It hurt her to say it. Don't punish the boy for my sins, he pleaded. He didn't do anything wrong. He deserves to live. She wanted to wake up from that moment and tell herself it was a dream, that the man who had broken her could not also be the man who now knelt to the ground of his mistakes. But real life didn't allow for neat waking. They were wading through it together. Night stretched into a second day. The van footage produced a plate number, partially obscured but enough to trace. It led them to a warehouse on the river. A dead end. A trap? Maybe. A hope? Also maybe. There could be more vans, diversions, Thomas warned. They might be testing our response. They could also be sloppy, Vincenzo said, or arrogant. Isabella studied the maps and photos until her eyes hurt. She felt the strange, disorienting sensation of relying on a man who had once been the axis of her undoing. "Listen," Vincenzo said suddenly, voice low. "If they hurt him—" He stopped, unable to finish. She finished it for him. "We'll kill them!" Her voice was steady, but inside a volcano of fear and resolve simmered. They agreed on a course. A small team, careful, surgical. No fireworks, no public show. Vincenzo's men would be there, but hidden, folded into the fabric of the city like smoke. Isabella's security team would simulate a ransom transfer as bait while the extraction team moved in. Timing would be everything. As the plan tightened, both of them felt the old chemistry, a current of electricity that had nothing to do with strategy and everything to do with those nights long ago. They tried not to look at how their hands brushed when passing a file, or how their shoulders nearly touched in the cramped planning room. When the meeting finally broke at dusk, they were both exhausted and more awake than they'd felt in years. The city around them hummed indifferent to the life-or-death gamble happening in a windowless room. Isabella walked to the front door to let him out. For a moment, they stood in the frame, two people who had been torn apart and were now bound together by blood and fury. "Will you stay near?" she asked, voice small. "I'll be where I need to be," he responded. His eyes held an unspoken promise and a warning. She wanted to ask for more. She wanted him to stay until Adrian was safe, to never leave again. But the woman who had clawed her way from nothing knew better than to trust that kind of plea. He stepped back toward the rain, then turned. "Isabella." She held her breath. He hesitated, then spoke the thing she had never expected to hear. "I'm sorry." It landed between them like an olive branch and a shrapnel wound. She didn't know if she could accept it, but she felt something shift, a hairline crack in the armor she'd built. "Save your apologies for later," she said, voice rough. "Bring my boy home." He bowed his head slightly, a soldier and a supplicant in one motion. Then he walked away, vanishing into the rainy night. She locked the door behind him and breathed for the first time in hours. The plan was set. Hope and terror sat side by side like two strangers at her kitchen table. She moved through the house trying to steel herself for what was to come, checking locks and cameras, kissing a photograph of Adrian and whispering, "Come back to me." Midnight felt like a landscape, vast and empty. She lay on the couch with the blanket pulled to her chin and slept in fits, waking at every shadow. At some point, while the city slept and she pretended to sleep, something small and heavy slid beneath her door. Silently, with the precision of someone who had done such things before. She didn't notice at first. The house groaned and the rain sang and her dreams tumbled. In the pale hour before dawn, she woke with a start, a cold breath on her neck. Something in her bones told her to look. She swung her feet to the floor and stumbled to the door. The carpet was damp under her socks. Her fingers searched blindly for the peephole. A paper lay there, edges dark with something that wasn't just rain. She pressed her palm to the mark and felt a warmth that was not from the weather. Blood. Her stomach dropped. She picked the paper up with the care of someone handling a live thing. The ink on it was smeared but legible. She read the words once, then again, as if repetition could change the meaning. The message was simple, brutal, and absolute. Stay out of it, or the boy dies. The city never slept that night. London's streets were soaked in mist, and the moon hung like a pale coin above the skyline. Isabella stood by the window, clutching the bloody note in trembling hands. Her heartbeat echoed louder than the ticking clock on the wall. She read the words again and again. "Stay out of it, or the boy dies." Her knees went weak. Tears blurred her vision, but fury burned brighter than fear. Vincenzo was somewhere out there, and he was her only hope and her greatest pain. The silence of her mansion was suffocating. Every shadow felt like a threat. She turned on the light, trying to calm herself, but her body trembled with helplessness. Outside, engines roared in the distance. Vincenzo was already moving. He had returned to the streets, his streets, but they no longer bowed to him. Power had shifted. New names, new blood ruled where he once commanded. Men who feared his name now hunted it. He wore his leather jacket again, the same one he wore when his heart still belonged to danger. The chain around his neck glimmered beneath the streetlights. His eyes, those cold blue eyes, burned with a mix of guilt and vengeance. He walked with purpose, a shadow reborn from regret. The night carried the smell of gunpowder and betrayal. Vincenzo met his old contact, Marco, in a dimly lit garage at the edge of London. Marco's face looked older, worn down by fear and secrets. "You shouldn't have come back," Marco muttered. "They know you're here. Everyone knows." Vincenzo lit a cigarette, the flame trembling slightly. "Then let them know," he said coldly. "I'm here for my son." Marco hesitated, then handed him a folder. Inside were grainy photos, masked men, black vans, a small hand clinging to a toy car. Isabella's son. Vincenzo's jaw clenched. "They're not asking for ransom, Vin," Marco warned. "They want you dead. The boy is bait." A spark of rage flared in Vincenzo's chest. "Then they'll choke on their own trap," he hissed. Meanwhile, Isabella couldn't sit still. Every minute without news felt like a century. She remembered the way Vincenzo said he'd bring Adrian back, even if it kills me. The thought terrified her. She grabbed her coat, ignoring the shaking in her hands. She couldn't wait any longer. She had survived betrayal, built an empire from ashes. She wasn't going to lose her child to monsters. She drove through the city lights, following the faint trail left by Vincenzo's men. Her car stopped outside a half-abandoned district, the kind of place where screams never echoed. In the alley ahead, shadows moved. Gunfire cracked through the silence. She ducked behind a broken wall, heart pounding in her throat. Through the smoke, she saw him. Vincenzo, moving like a ghost among bullets. Every shot, every step was ruthless precision. The same man who once ruled the Italian underworld. But there was something different in his eyes now. Desperation, not dominance. She wanted to call his name, but fear froze her voice. Then suddenly, a figure emerged from the dark behind her, a gun raised. Her breath caught. Before she could move, a shot rang out, but it wasn't hers. Vincenzo lunged from the shadows, tackling her to the ground. The bullet meant for her tore into his shoulder. Blood splattered across her hand. She screamed his name, Vincenzo! The world around her blurred. He groaned, his face pale, his breath shallow. His blood soaked her dress as she tried to hold him upright. Why would you do that?" she cried. He smiled weakly, his hand brushing her cheek. "Because I couldn't lose you again." Her tears fell like rain. He winced, trying to stand, but his strength was fading. The alley echoed with footsteps, enemies closing in. Isabella dragged him behind a dumpster, pressing her scarf against his wound. "Don't you dare die on me," she whispered. He looked at her, eyes flickering between pain and something deeper. "Love, maybe." "I told you to stay out of it," he rasped. "And you told me you'd bring him back," she replied fiercely. "So we do it together." He stared at her, her fire, her defiance. Even bleeding. He smirked. She was still the same woman who had stolen his heart in that restaurant years ago. Gunfire erupted again. Vincenzo reached for his pistol, firing back with gritted teeth. 2 men went down. Isabella gasped, covering her ears as bullets ricocheted off metal. Smoke and chaos swallowed the night. Vincenzo dragged her into an abandoned warehouse nearby, collapsing against a wall. The air smelled of rust and fear. She tore off part of her sleeve, wrapping his wound. He winced, but didn't stop her. "You shouldn't be here," he said again, weaker this time. "I'm not leaving my son," she shot back. Their eyes locked. Blue against blue, the reflection of all their lost years shimmering between them. He touched her chin gently, his hand trembling. "I never stopped loving you, Isabella," he whispered. Her heart ached. "You have a cruel way of showing it," she murmured, but her hand didn't move from his chest. For a fleeting moment, time froze. Outside, the city screamed with violence, but inside that broken warehouse, something fragile bloomed again. Forgiveness. She leaned closer, their faces inches apart, his breath warm against her skin. But then, a sound shattered the silence. A phone buzzing on the floor. It wasn't hers. Vincenzo grabbed it, his expression hardening as he answered. A distorted voice on the other end laughed coldly. "Still chasing ghosts, Moretti? You'll never find the boy, because he's not the target this time." Vincenzo's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" he demanded. The line went dead. He looked at Isabella, his voice breaking through the pain. Vincenzo's breath hitched, his voice a whisper, trembling between agony and truth. "They're not after money," he murmured, gripping her hand. His eyes darkened, full of realization and dread. "They're after you." The words echoed through the silence like a curse. "They're after you." Isabella froze, her heart thundering in her chest. She looked into Vincenzo's bloodshot blue eyes, eyes that once made her feel safe, now filled with dread. The air inside the warehouse felt heavy, thick with tension and the smell of smoke. She swallowed hard. "After me? What do you mean?" Vincenzo winced, clutching his bleeding shoulder. He could barely stand, but his instincts never dulled. "They used the boy as bait," he muttered. "They wanted to bring you out. You're the real prize." Her blood ran cold. "But why? I'm not part of that world anymore." He met her gaze, grim and knowing. "You built an empire, Isabella. That makes you more powerful than most men in mine." She turned away, trying to process his words. Her empire, her company, had enemies she never knew existed. Her breath trembled as realization dawned. "Someone close to me," she whispered. "Someone from inside." Vincenzo leaned against the wall, his face pale but sharp. He knew that tone, the way her voice shifted from fear to fire. She was already planning, already fighting back in her mind. That was the Isabella he had fallen for. She turned back to him. "You need a doctor." "I need to find our son," he said, his voice low but unyielding. The words "our son" made her heart twist. There was so much love and pain wrapped inside those two syllables. For a second, they just stood there, breathing the same air, remembering everything they'd lost. The sound of approaching sirens broke their silence. Vincenzo cursed under his breath. "They're tracking my car. We have to move." She helped him up, her arm around his waist. Every touch sent a spark between them, a mix of tension and something deeper. They slipped out the back door, disappearing into the fog-covered alleys. London was alive with chaos, sirens honking and the hum of danger in the air. They drove in silence for miles, heading to a safe house only Vincenzo knew, a run-down villa on the outskirts of the city, his ghost from the past. Inside, the air was dusty, the curtains torn. He sat down exhausted while she cleaned his wound with trembling hands. He flinched, but said nothing. Her touch was gentle but cold. When she finally looked into his eyes, her voice cracked. "You left me when I needed you most." His jaw clenched. "Because I thought you betrayed me." Her hand stilled. "And if I had died alone, would that have made it better?" Silence. He couldn't answer. His guilt was a wound no bullet could ever match. Finally she stood, wiping her tears. "Enough," she said. "We find Adrian. No more past." He nodded. "Then we start by finding out who's behind this." Her eyes narrowed. "I already have an idea." She walked to the old laptop on the dusty desk, typing with furious precision. Lines of data filled the screen, bank transfers, phone logs, names, and then she froze. One name flashed again and again, Victor Morel, her business partner, her mentor, her friend. Vincenzo saw her face pale. "Who is he?" she whispered. "The man who helped me start my company, the one I trusted with everything." Rage built in her chest like fire. He was at Adrian's birthday, she realized aloud. He knew where we lived, what time I left the office. Vincenzo slammed his fist on the table. He's working with the rival Mafia. She stared at him. How do you know? Because I know the kind of men who do this, he said darkly. They don't want money. They want control. And Victor found the perfect way, through you. Tears burned her eyes, but her voice stayed steady. Then we end it. Vincenzo smiled faintly, that dangerous smirk she remembered too well. Now you sound like me. She grabbed a pistol from the table, checked the magazine, and met his gaze. Maybe I've learned a few things. For the first time in 7 years, they stood side by side, not as enemies, not as lovers, but as soldiers, two broken souls bound by blood and revenge. They tracked Victor's men to an abandoned shipping yard near the Thames. The night was cold, the wind sharp with salt and rust. Lights flickered through fog, outlining the shapes of armed guards and cargo containers. Vincenzo's instincts kicked in, precise, ruthless, silent. He moved like a predator, taking down 2 men before they even raised their guns. Isabella followed close behind, every step fearless. The sound of distant waves mixed with the click of their weapons. In the shadows, they worked as one, fire and silk. At one point, they ducked behind a container, their faces inches apart. Her breath hitched, his eyes softened. You still remember how to aim? He teased. She smirked. Better than you remember how to apologize. He chuckled quietly, then pressed his forehead against hers, just for a heartbeat, just to feel that warmth again. But the moment was shattered by gunfire. Bullets tore through the air. They dove for cover. The shipping yard erupted into chaos. Explosions lit up the night like hellfire. Vincenzo dragged her behind a truck. We're close, he shouted over the noise. They're moving him tonight. How do you know? He nodded toward a van speeding toward the docks. Through the window, a small shadow moved, a child's silhouette. Adrian, she screamed. He grabbed her arm. Wait, if you go now, they'll kill you both. Her eyes blazed with fury and fear. I can't just wait. He looked at her, really looked. This wasn't the innocent waitress he once met. This was a mother ready to burn the world for her son. They fought their way through the gunfire, hand in hand. Every shot, every scream brought them closer. And yet, somewhere inside the chaos, he realized something. He wasn't just fighting to save his son. He was fighting to save her, to earn back what he'd lost. Finally, the yard went quiet. Bodies lay scattered, smoke rising from burning crates. Vincenzo coughed, wiping blood from his face. They searched desperately, but the van was gone. Isabella collapsed to her knees, sobbing. He knelt beside her, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. We'll find him, he whispered. I swear on my life, we'll find him. She looked at him, her tears catching in the light of the flames. Their faces were close again. Too close. And before either could think, she kissed him. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate, wild, aching. The taste of blood and salt, fire and love. When they pulled apart, both were shaking. Then her phone rang. She hesitated, staring at the glowing screen. A private number. Her hands trembled as she answered. Hello? Static crackled. Then a small, trembling voice broke through. Mommy! Adrian's voice quivered, faint and terrified. Isabella's blood ran cold. Adrian? Baby, where are you? A pause. Then the sound of heavy breathing. And then the boy whispered the words that froze her heart. Mommy, he's here. Mommy, he's here. The voice was small, trembling, filled with fear that ripped straight through Isabella's soul. Her fingers tightened around the phone, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely breathe. Adrian, baby, listen to me, she whispered, her voice shaking. Where are you? Who's with you? A faint sob came through the speaker, then silence, followed by a low, distorted voice. Come alone, Isabella, or the boy dies. The line went dead. She stood frozen, the phone slipping from her hand. Her knees felt weak, but the fire inside her was unstoppable now. Vincenzo's hand shot out, catching her wrist. "Tell me what he said." She looked up at him, eyes wet with panic. "They want me to come alone." He shook his head. "That's not happening. Vincenzo." "No," he growled, his voice carrying that familiar dominance. "You're not walking into their trap. Not again." Her lips trembled. "They have my son." His jaw tightened. "Our son," he corrected softly. "And I'm getting him back." The night was burning with chaos when they reached the outskirts of the city. An abandoned factory loomed ahead. Old, rusted, forgotten. It stood like a monster in the mist, lit only by the flicker of fire and gunmetal moonlight. Vincenzo's men had followed from a distance, waiting for his signal. He looked at Isabella one last time before stepping out of the car. "Stay behind me, no matter what happens." But she shook her head, eyes fierce. "You forget. I've been fighting my whole life. I'm not that waitress anymore." He almost smiled, that proud, painful curve of his lips, before loading his gun. "Then stay close. We end this together." They moved through the shadows like ghosts. The air was thick with smoke and tension, the ground littered with broken glass. Inside the factory, shouts echoed, rough voices barking orders. Vincenzo crouched, peeking around a rusted beam. 2 guards stood near the entrance, weapons raised. He moved like lightning, a blur of motion and precision. 2 shots, 2 bodies down. Isabella covered her mouth, her heart racing. He turned to her, whispering, "Still think I'm rusty?" She almost laughed, despite the fear clawing inside her. As they crept deeper, the sounds grew louder. Crying, footsteps, metal clanging. And then she saw him. Adrian. Tied to a chair in the middle of the factory floor, a spotlight blinding his little face. Her breath caught in her throat. Tears filled her eyes, but before she could move, a man stepped out of the shadows. Victor Morel, her former partner, the man she had once trusted like family. "Well, well," Victor sneered. "The queen herself comes crawling back." His pistol gleamed under the dim light. Vincenzo's eyes turned into steel. "If you touch that boy again, I'll make you wish you'd never been born." Victor laughed, slow and cruel. "You've changed, Moretti. The beast has gone soft." "Try me," Vincenzo replied coldly. Gunfire erupted. The factory became a war zone. Bullets flying, glass shattering, metal groaning under chaos. Vincenzo moved with the fury of a man possessed, every shot precise, every motion lethal. Years of rage exploded inside him. The beast the underworld once feared was alive again. He tore through Victor's men like a storm, relentless and unstoppable. The sound of his gun echoed like thunder. Isabella ducked behind machinery, shielding herself as sparks flew around. Her heart ached, not just with fear, but pride. He was fighting for her, for their son, for redemption. Suddenly, a hand grabbed her from behind. Rough, cold, merciless, a gun pressed against her temple. Victor's voice whispered, venomous and smug. "You always thought you were smarter than me." She struggled, but he held firm. "You took everything from me," he snarled. "Your company, your fame, your glory. Now I'll take your life." But Isabella wasn't the same fragile woman who used to hide behind others' strength. She gritted her teeth, slammed her elbow into his ribs, and twisted. The gun fell. She kicked it away, spinning and punching him across the face. Victor stumbled, shocked. "Not so fragile now, am I?" she hissed. He lunged at her again, but she grabbed a metal rod from the floor and swung with all her might. It cracked against his shoulder, sending him crashing into a pile of crates. His gun skidded across the floor, right into Vincenzo's hand. Vincenzo raised it without hesitation. "End of the road," he said. But before he could fire, Victor laughed again, blood dripping from his mouth. "Even if you kill me, it's too late." He nodded toward the corner, a timer blinking red. A bomb. Isabella's eyes widened in horror. "Vincenzo!" she screamed. He didn't think, he just ran. Adrian was still tied to the chair, the timer ticking down. Vincenzo grabbed the boy, ripping off the ropes. "Close your eyes, son!" he shouted, throwing his body over the child as the explosion tore through the factory. The world became fire. A wave of heat and smoke crashed into them, hurling metal and ash through the air. Isabella fell to the ground, covering her face, the sound of her own scream lost in the chaos. When the flames died, she crawled through debris, coughing, crying. "Vincenzo!" she shouted. Then she saw him, lying among the wreckage, blood pouring from his chest, but in his arms, Adrian, alive, shaking, but safe. "Daddy saved me," the boy whispered. Isabella's heart broke. She ran to them, holding both in her arms, sobbing uncontrollably. "Stay with me," she begged. "Please, Vincenzo, don't you dare leave me again." He looked up at her, his lips trembling. His hand found her cheek, smearing blood across her skin. "I told you I'd bring him back," he whispered weakly. She shook her head, tears falling onto his face. "Don't talk like that," she cried. "You're going to make it. You have to." He smiled faintly. That same smile that once made her fall in love, but now it was fading. The sound of sirens grew louder outside, flashing red and blue through the broken walls. Adrian clung to Isabella's arm, crying, "Mommy, help Daddy!" Her sobs grew louder, her hands pressing against his wound, trying to stop the bleeding. He coughed, the taste of iron on his tongue. "Tell him," he whispered, his voice breaking. She leaned closer, her tears falling on his lips. "Tell him what, Vincenzo?" His eyes fluttered open one last time, blue and dim like dying light. "Tell him," he breathed. "I love him." The sirens wailed outside as Isabella screamed his name, holding his bloodied body in her arms. Adrian sobbed beside her, clutching his father's hand. The factory burned behind them, and in the flicker of the flames, it was impossible to tell if Vincenzo Moretti was still breathing. The smell of antiseptic filled the room. Machines hummed softly beside the bed, each beep a fragile promise of life. Isabella sat motionless, her fingers wrapped around Vincenzo's cold hand. For days she hadn't moved much, only whispered prayers into the quiet. Every hour felt like a battle between hope and despair. The man who had once terrified the world now lay still, pale and broken. His tattoos looked faded against the hospital light, the gold chain resting motionless on his chest. She brushed his hair back gently, tears slipping down her cheeks. Beside her, little Adrian slept, curled up like an angel, clutching a toy car in his small hand. He didn't know the full story, the blood, the bullets, the betrayal, but his presence was a living reminder of the love that had survived the fire. Outside the hospital window, dawn was breaking. The first rays of sunlight touched Vincenzo's face, and for a moment Isabella thought she saw his eyelids twitch. She leaned closer, her breath trembling. "Vincenzo, can you hear me?" There was a faint movement, a weak grip around her hand. Her heart leaped. Then, with a rasping breath, his lips parted. "Isabella." The word came out hoarse but real. She gasped and pressed her forehead against his. "You're awake," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You came back to us." He blinked, disoriented, scanning the room until his eyes landed on their son. "Adrian," he murmured. "He's safe?" She nodded through tears. "He's safe, because of you." He tried to sit up, but pain surged through his chest. She gently pushed him back. "Don't move. You lost too much blood." He winced, closing his eyes. "I thought I was done, Isabella. Thought the bullet was the end." Her voice softened. "You promised me once that nothing would take you from me. Not even death kept you away." He turned his head slightly, staring at her face. The same face he once broke, the same heart he shattered. Now it was the only thing holding him together. "You should hate me," he whispered. "I did," she said quietly. "Every day for years. But hate fades. Love doesn't." A long silence filled the room, heavy yet peaceful. He looked down at their intertwined hands, her delicate fingers over his scarred ones. "I destroyed everything that mattered," he said, "and you still stayed. I stayed because of him," she said, nodding toward their sleeping son. "But I'm here now because of you." For the first time in years, Vincenzo's blue eyes softened. No walls, no arrogance, just a man stripped of power, humbled by love. "Do you remember the night I told you not to look at me again?" he asked. Her lips trembled. "How could I forget? That night killed me." He exhaled slowly, guilt etched deep in his tone. "I said it to protect you, or that's what I told myself. But truth is, I was afraid of what you made me feel." Isabella reached up, touching his cheek. "And what do you feel now?" He smiled faintly, tears gathering in his eyes. "Peace for the first time." Her eyes filled with emotion. "Then hold on to it, because we've both earned it." Days turned into weeks. Vincenzo's recovery was slow but steady. Isabella stayed with him every day, reading business files, making calls, running her empire from his bedside. Sometimes she'd catch him watching her with quiet admiration. "You built all this," he said once, "without me." She smiled softly. "I had to learn to be strong when you left." "And now?" he asked. "Now I'm strong enough to choose love again." Adrian would run into the room, his laughter echoing against the sterile walls. He'd climb onto Vincenzo's lap, tracing the tattoos on his arm with tiny fingers. "Daddy, what's this one mean?" "That one," Vincenzo said, smiling faintly, "means never give up. And this one, that one, means family." The boy grinned proudly, resting his head on his father's chest. Isabella stood by the window, tears glistening in her eyes as she watched them. Her two worlds finally united. Weeks later, Vincenzo was discharged. He stepped out of the hospital with Isabella by his side, the sunlight washing over his face. No guards, no entourage, just them. They returned to her mansion, now his home too. The place was filled with memories of loneliness, now blooming with laughter and warmth. Vincenzo helped Adrian build toy towers while Isabella prepared dinner. Each moment felt surreal, almost fragile, like a dream they both feared might vanish. That night, after putting Adrian to sleep, Isabella found Vincenzo sitting on the balcony staring at the city lights. He held a small velvet box in his hand. When she approached, he turned to her, his blue eyes glimmering in the moonlight. "Isabella," he began softly, "I spent years building an empire of blood and fear, but you built something stronger. Love, peace, and a life worth living." She froze, heart pounding. He stood up slowly, his hand trembling as he opened the box. Inside was a simple silver ring. "Give me a second chance," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. "Not as a mafia boss, not as the man who hurt you, but as your man, the one who'll love you right this time." Tears filled her eyes. She stepped closer, placing her hand over his. "You already have it," she said. "You had it the moment you saved our son." He smiled, a real smile, full of life. Then, under the silver glow of the moon, he slipped the ring onto her finger, and for the first time, the world around them felt at peace. Weeks later, bells echoed across the countryside. The wedding was small, intimate. Friends, family, and a few faces from the past. Isabella walked down the aisle in white silk, her smile brighter than the morning sun. Vincenzo waited at the altar, tears glistening in his eyes. When she reached him, he whispered, "You're my redemption." "And you," she replied softly, "are my peace." As they kissed, petals rained down, and the guests cheered. The camera slowly panned across the scene, the white rose placed delicately over his old gun, lying on the table beside them. It was more than decoration. It was a promise, a symbol that love had conquered what war could not. But as the music swelled and laughter filled the air, a cold wind brushed through the open window. In the shadows beyond the chapel, a figure stood watching, his face obscured, his gaze sharp as a blade. He adjusted his black gloves, a cruel smile forming under the dim light. The man who once swore vengeance on Vincenzo was still alive, and as he turned away, disappearing into the dark, one thing was certain: peace never lasts forever. Not when ghosts of the past still breathe. And somewhere in that darkness, revenge had just begun to whisper again.